Hello and welcome to the debate. We're doing, of course, a special edition on the Prime Minister's speech at the UN General Assembly and, of course, his visit at the 78th UN General Assembly session, in which a number of issues have been raised by the caretaker Prime Minister on his maiden visit to the UNGA. And this is important, especially in terms of a number of narratives that have been put forward by the Prime Minister, including, of course, regional and global issues of utmost importance to Pakistan, and then the overall dynamics of the global arena, which includes issues such as COVID, the issues such as conflicts, that of Ukraine and Russia and others, and then, of course, the very large issue of climate change. He also talked about how Pakistan's issues surrounding food, fuel and finance, and that also of the world, are centered around the issues of conflict post-COVID and, of course, climate change as well. And the Prime Minister also put forward a number of measures taken by his government towards putting Pakistan on the right track and what it's going to be doing ahead in terms of its responsibility. And then, of course, there was also discussion around the areas that need to be given top priority and importance, such as that including climate change and SDGs, summits of which he also addressed earlier than today, and talked about how the commitment needs to be there and has to be followed by the tangible actions that the international community needs to take to uphold its commitments related to climate justice and climate financing. What's also important, of course, are a number of issues that have also been raised in the foreign policy arena by the caretaker Prime Minister, including that of issues such as, of course, peace in Afghanistan, which has a direct effect on peace in Pakistan, especially with regards to the kind of support we need and expect from Afghanistan for the TTP, Daesh and other groups. There is also, of course, concern with reference to what is going on in an Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, something that he emphasized as part of the UN resolutions, and this is something that needs to be respected and has to be carried out in terms of its true letter and spirit. There's also discussion on issues such as Islamophobia that Pakistan has also been at the forefront of, talking about how it is because of Pakistan's efforts that a resolution was also adopted by the OIC, and there's a lot of efforts that have been made in this regard, but there needs to be more engagement from people around the world. There's also, of course, the issues that need global attention that the Prime Minister focused on, giving, of course, Pakistan's perspective, and then talking about exactly what sort of a response would be required. In the sidelines, of course, also of the UNGA, the Prime Minister has met with leaders of the world, including that of US and China, and emphasized the priority of Pakistan to bring in more investment, particularly in priority sectors such as agriculture, mining and energy. And this is something that the Prime Minister wants the world to also understand and focus on, given where Pakistan stands today and the political and economic dynamics of the country. So we're going to be taking a look at the speech that has been made at the UN General Assembly, and also in the way that the stance and perspective of Pakistan has been put forward in a number of collective issues raised both at the regional and global level that, of course, require utmost attention for Pakistan, and what impact will this have in terms of how Pakistan moves forward in the way that people perhaps better understand its perspective. For this, of course, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Raja Faisal and Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined online by our guest Syed Muhammad Ali, who's a foreign affairs expert, Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador, and Mr. Anwar-Iqbal, who's a senior journalist. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the debate. And let me start with you, Farrukh. The situation, given, of course, what is going on, is really important, not just in the dynamics that Pakistan is facing in terms of the political and economic situation, but also the kind of world that is shared by the entire international community. In that respect, what do you think in terms of what the Prime Minister has spoken about? Was he able to identify and speak about the large range of issues that are affecting the international community at the moment, and put forward Pakistan's stance and perspective in a way that perhaps now the world understands and understands us better, and also thinks about the kind of direction that we're hoping to achieve?
Right. Thank you very much, Sana. I think that when you talk about the speech itself, I think it is important to note that it was a very well structured speech. It was very well delivered also. Right, and I actually was mentioning it earlier as well, but for your benefit and for the benefit of the viewers, I wanted to point out when the Prime Minister was actually leaving, when this whole idea of him going to the UNGA was being conceived. At that time, the debate was whether he should go or not. At that time, there was no way to understand that India is going to self-destruct and actually perform a harakiri on itself so magnificently, right? It was very lucky that the Prime Minister was there in the room when India is actually totally damaging itself. So Prime Minister's speech there actually covered a lot of ground, particularly regarding Pakistan's concerns from law and order to Kashmir, and then economic challenges also. And finally, I thought that he also did a great job of highlighting the Islamophobia aspects, which are very important, because there seems to be a debate, Sana, among various Muslim school of thought. For example, on one side you have people who keep on saying that attack on the symbols is the actual attack on Islam. There are others who actually talk about racial profiling of Muslims and the way they're treated, especially in India or elsewhere. So I think that the Prime Minister, by combining the two, did a great job of highlighting that what might be driving extremism all over the world, this habit of attacking Muslims and marginalizing them. So I think that the Prime Minister actually covered all the ground.
All right. We've also been joined by Syed Muhammad Ali, who's a foreign affairs expert. And Ali Sahab, I want to take your opinion as well in terms of course, the fact that we have a caretaker Prime Minister representing us and bringing forth Pakistan's stance at the UNGA. I want to know, given the tough times that the country is facing, how well do you think has Pakistan's stance and narrative been put forward? And what do you think about the speech that has been made? Of course, a number of these issues that have been raised have been done before as well. But how pertinent was the way in which it has been communicated now and the way that, of course, our audience is looking at the country? Yes, Ali Sahab, can you hear me? I believe we don't have Ali Sahab with us yet, but Faisal, I'll take your perspective in as well in terms of course, this is a big thing for the caretaker Prime Minister to represent Pakistan on the UNGA, and it's something, of course, in which the top leaders of the world are getting to hear the leader of Pakistan represent the country, and then of course the stances on various issues and what sort of a step forward is going to be taken in that direction. How well do you think he performed that job, and how would you compare that with the way that these issues have been raised similarly in the past?
Sana, it's a very good question, and of course the way he has represented Pakistan at this hour, I think it was marvelous. First of all, we just need to talk about the timing of it. Timing is crucial. Why? Because people, the world is just waiting to learn from Pakistan, of course, the regional changes and of course whatever is taking place in between Pakistan and India. He has highlighted each and everything, and I think as earlier Farrukh has mentioned, the way he has highlighted Kashmir's case, reiterated the UN duties, why it is important for United Nations to take it into account, and why it is important for the United Nations to of course implement its own resolutions on bilateral conflict when it comes to Indo-Pak. And I think he has highlighted each and everything on the eastern border and then western border. Most importantly, the western border he highlighted in a way, I think it was based on the facts, based on the realities, and he wanted the world to know about the facts, what is going on the western border of Pakistan. I'm referring to, of course, Afghanistan's border, whatever is taking place, the changes taking place on Afghan border. He has highlighted it brilliantly, and of course he has highlighted the facts as well about Afghanistan. He reiterated that of course the world is concerned about women issues, about women education issues. He has highlighted, and he has said it again, that Pakistan share the same with the world, the concerns world has been highlighting about Afghanistan, and he himself said it that of course Islamabad is constantly in touch with Kabul, referring to so many issues which are taking place between both of the countries, largely related to security issues. Security is fragile on the border in between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and he has highlighted that the elements which are still persisting within Afghanistan, they need to be countered, and he said it to the world that Pakistan has pledged to, of course, continue this war on terror, which is originating from within Afghanistan, and of course Afghanistan itself is concerned about it, and he told to the world that Islamabad and Kabul, both of them, they agree on certain issues related to security, but
Right.
more needs to be done. And in that sense, he required world's cooperation in that as well, because this is something which is of course important to be countered at this hour,
Right.
before it obviously grows bigger.
Right. We've also been joined on telephone line by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Khan. Thank you for joining us in the debate, Dr. Jamil. And of course, the caretaker Prime Minister has represented the country at the UNGA today and has, of course, presented a number of issues in his speech. And I want your take on exactly what you think about the way that these issues have been highlighted, the way that the Prime Minister was able to communicate Pakistan's stance to world leaders, and how effective do you think this will be moving forward?
Well, I've attended more than about a dozen General Assembly sessions like this, and it's one of the very rare occasions that I find a well-rounded speech by the Chief Executive of Pakistan, Prime Minister Kakar. And he has covered all the aspects which was very crucial for Pakistan. And those aspects were, he started with international geopolitics, geoeconomics. He also mentioned about the climate change, neighbors, and he highlighted very amply about the terrorism, and that terrorism between the lines, he underscored the UN resolutions between the lines, he underscored the Doha agreement between the lines, he underscored the resolution which was passed in August 2021 after Taliban had taken over. So all these aspects, in fact, at his level, he didn't have to cite all the rules and regulations, but between the line, what I could read, and people like myself, what they read, they can very conveniently correlate all his deliberations, all his content of his speech, which covers the international law as well as the regional and geopolitical and the geoeconomic aspects. Now, having said so, he has touched upon the Ukraine, and he has touched upon the conflict in the world. He has touched upon the impact of those conflicts on various countries, including Pakistan. He touched upon, once he was describing about the SDG, he touched upon the COVID-19. He touched upon the conflict which has devastated the economy of so many countries, and they have got more poverty and hunger. This is what he mentioned there. And then while he was describing SDG, in fact, just saying it in these plain words, that 100 billion were allocated annually, and Pakistan suffered about 30 billion damage in the previous flood, where even the Secretary General had come, and Secretary General had himself emphasized on the significance and importance of the rehabilitation work. So he emphasized that those pledges, in other words, not in these plain words, but he indicated, and he meant, and his message resonated to those countries which had pledged that much of money for the countries, particularly those countries who are worst hit by the climate change, and particularly Pakistan, what they suffered last year.
Right.
Very ably, we've been alleged that investment environment in Pakistan, and which is true, have not been congenial for the investors, for the foreign direct investment. And he very ably described that now they have taken a new initiative, they have innovated new things, and that was, he very clearly mentioned about the SIFC, that is a Special Investment Facilitation Cell. And making that as a base, he invited the manufacturers, he invited the investors, while he was with the same breath, he did not ignore our diplomatic relation. I'm coming on the diplomatic balancing, what he did with the relations with China and the US and those lobbies. So he mentioned about the second phase of CPEC. There seems to be a reason for that. CPEC is not that very palatable for the America and its allies because of the containment policy of the United States. But he did mention that about the second phase, and he did mention about the connectivity. And connectivity means the SCO automatically comes in, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the ECO Economic Cooperation Organization. So I must compliment the contributor towards the speech, Foreign Office, and other departments who have contributed towards finalizing this speech and the way the Pakistan Prime Minister has delivered. And then he did not ignore the problem which we are facing about Afghanistan and the and the terrorism which is resonating from Afghanistan. And he has put it in a very diplomatic manner that anything from and to Pakistan in terms of terrorism is obviously not acceptable to Pakistan. And then he mentioned something which we have been always indicating, and we've been, even the dossier which we sent to the United Nations, it's about 131 pages dossier in which we cited the evidence, signals, the telephones, and Kalgoshan and the interference of India. But he, in a very diplomatic, because the platform, the forum was such that he could not really go into those details, what was there in the dossier. But he said that externally encouraged terrorism, and that between the line automatically indicates interference. And now, if you connect that, so he did not mention about Canada, but if you connect about the role of India, and he should not have mentioned about Canada, but because that's a bilateral problem, although it's a multilateral once it comes to the affecting the sovereignty of any country. Trudeau says that it has affected the sovereignty of Canada, that a Canadian citizen has been killed by an agent of India in the garb of diplomacy and diplomatic action. So that also he has mentioned about externally encouraged terrorism, and we have a proof in shape of Commander Kalgoshan Yadev. Then not only he did not stop there, the Prime Minister did not stop there. He also appreciated the relations, the upcoming relations, and the recent diplomatic ties which Iran and Saudi Arabia made. Which what does it mean? It means that China had negotiated, and he did mention that, and he did mention about connected that with Palestine, that the durable peace can only happen if we follow the Camp David Accord, and if we follow the other accords which have been taking place, United Nations resolution about Baitul Muqaddas. So he mentioned that, and he connected it with Palestine two-state theory. So if you encompass and if you really correlate this entire speech, which connects with all the multilateral and to some extent bilateral issues. He did mention that Pakistan has been a biggest contributor of United Nations peacekeeping forces, and he even gave the figure of 230,000 troops which we contributed towards the peacekeeping. And peacekeeping has a very unique role and a very special role in the United Nations implementation of the UN Charter. And what is that particular specific portion of UN Charter? UN Charter, once the Security Council resolution is passed, and if some sanction is imposed on a country or some peace is to be brought in a country by force, then Chapter 7 is invoked, and Security Council resolution then authorizes the United Nations to muster peacekeeping force, and Pakistan has been contributing in that peacekeeping. And yes,
Right,
and
absolutely. And Dr. Jamil, thank you for that comprehensive analysis. And we're going to be talking about each of these issues in detail as well. But of course, with the way that you've also talked about in your own experience, this seems to be something that has been well represented and also articulated very clearly in terms of the number of issues and topics that have been raised by the caretaker Prime Minister. And we're going to go on each one in detail. And I want to start off, Farrukh, with the issue of climate change, something that has also been attended in terms of other summits by the caretaker Prime Minister, including SDGs and climate financing. And this is especially important given, of course, Pakistan's experience not only last year, but also in general in the way that we're prone to climate-induced disasters. But I want to know, coming from last year, where we, of course, also put forward the issue right after the floods in 2022, and then also at the COP27, the issues of climate justice and including loss and damage were raised by the Pakistan government. And I want to then understand from then on to now, what then is our expectation? I understand that the 100 billion pledge is talked about and the commitments there, but in terms of the overall reforms that are required, or the way that the framework needs to be set, the way that the pledges need to be followed up with, how exactly then is Pakistan able to represent what it needs, what its expectations are, and is it also setting a framework for the international community that this is how you can respond, or is it looking for a collective way to look at this?
Right, Sana, and I will answer this question, but before that, will you allow me to actually address something that Dr. Saab was also mentioned, and that is important as well, because I think that usually it is thought that caretakers have temporary mandates, so international speech of this type might not have that kind of weightage. But amazingly, this might actually go down in history as one of the most consequential speeches. When the environment is so deceptive that all you have to do is look at the Canadian delegation, roll your eyes and say, look what we have to actually deal with. So your battles are already won. I think India is a gift that keeps on giving, and that's why the Prime Minister's speech there was very prudent, very timely, very important, and his intervention at the CFR also yesterday and other places was also important. Now, regarding climate justice and all those issues, there were Europe pledges made at COP27. And then we also saw something very interesting. At that time also, because of Pakistan's team that was representing Pakistan's case there, I thought at that time also that Sherry Rahman Sahaba, Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, they all laid the spade work really well. But what happens after that, I'm less concerned about the $100 billion pledges by the world's most powerful countries. I'm more concerned about the pledges that were made for Pakistan in the past, in the past 1 year, especially at Geneva. So I think that it is important that the Prime Minister of Pakistan goes to the UN. There he actually raises the concerns regarding Pakistan's climate experiences and the tragedies that might have befallen on the country, and then remind the world community how important it is that there has to be some, walking the talk as well. I think that now we are going to, in November, we are going to see COP28 at Dubai. So there also Pakistan's concerns will be raised by this Prime Minister, this team, and I think that we will have better chance of getting more relief that was pledged earlier but was not delivered.
Right, and Farrukh, can you also explain to me how the discussions around climate change and the summits that are happening on the sidelines of the UNGA are closely linked with the COP28? Is the decision making at COP28 also impacted by the way that these issues are discussed at the UNGA?
Of course, why not? Look, remember that COP27, 28, this whole process is an outcome or a function of UN system, right? So whatever is being discussed at the UNGA, and especially as you pointed out in the various meetings that go on in the sidelines, their agenda is set, and then those issues actually are escalated that are going to be discussed at COP28. So Pakistan, by representing itself, by sending its highest official there, has done a great deal of flagging all the concerns and highlighting all the issues that need to be addressed.
Right, but decisions are going to be taken in the COP28. This is what I wanted to understand.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I thought that you wanted to know whether UNGA is going to play any role or not. I thought that was exact wording of yours, right?
That too, but I wanted to know where the decision-making process takes place, and then what the role of the UNGA would be in that.
What I was pointing to was that this actually sets the environment for COP28.
Yeah, got it.
But then COP28 is, of course, COP28.
Sure. Faisal, the Prime Minister also, of course, has pointed out previously as well, and now too, with regards to the way that the global dynamics have impacted the world. And of course, climate change has been one of the major issues that impacts the entire world, whether or not it's something such as what we've seen last year, or whether or not there are countries that are prone to climate-induced disaster. Everybody is seeing the impact. And so the way in which we need the change is something that is going to be in the favor of the entire world. But of course, that also means certain cuts for the developed world, and of course, especially in terms of carbon emissions and the kind of major steps that are needed to actually achieve that. How much do you think will then the way that the stance of countries that are bearing most of the damage at the moment, such as Pakistan, is going to be received by countries that are contributing more to carbon change emissions, and how exactly will Pakistan's stance then be able to translate into action?
Yes, Sana, if we look at how well Pakistan has presented its case when it comes to obviously being a country that is largely affected by the climate change, and we are a country that has always been very responsible towards our environment, and of course environment is something that the world is sharing, and we had obviously nothing in terms of carbon emissions. We have been very controlled, less than expected from any country, and that is what we have been so responsible towards our environment related to. But when it comes to Pakistan's case, of course previous government and this government constantly we have been obviously representing our case very professionally, and world individual countries of the world, they already know that Pakistan has done a lot and suffered a lot in terms of climate change.
Right, and absolutely. And Faisal, I'll take more of your view on this as well, but we've also been joined by Mr. Anwar-Iqbal, who's a senior journalist, and want to take his perspective as well as with the Prime Minister. And I want to understand, Anwar Saab, the situation, of course, in general, in the way that this speech has impacted the world leaders and the audience, and how well received do you think it has been?
Well, I mean, this is an international platform. Whatever you say gets highlighted. And he made some good points about climate change and about the need to help the debt-ridden countries to come out of this crisis. He also spoke about Pakistan's efforts to revive its economy. He talked about the government's plan to recover from the effects of the flood. So I think those things are important and they should have been talked about. Then he, as Pakistan always does, he raised the Kashmir issue, talked about Afghanistan, TTP, and then Yemen and all. So basically, with an address to the General Assembly is like conveying your country's policies on various international issues, and that is what the Prime Minister did.
Right, absolutely. And Anwar Saab, the situation, especially given the circumstances that the collective world is facing, have also been pointed out by the Prime Minister, including, of course, the post-COVID era issues such as climate change, and then, of course, conflicts such as that of Ukraine and Russia. And I want to know then, in terms of a shared experience, how much were the international leaders be able to understand and remain cognizant of what Pakistan is facing, also in terms of what they are also experiencing, and how relevant was what was shared by the Prime Minister to them in terms of now then the action that is expected?
Well, I understood some of your points. The thing is, we have been overwhelmed by a crowd of Bangladeshis who are protesting against and for the Bangladeshi Prime Minister. They're all over the place. But yeah, what do you, I mean, as the Prime Minister said, that when, in January, when the UN arranged that meeting in Geneva, they pledged more than $10 billion. But according to the UN, not even half of those pledges have been realized. So the Prime Minister talked about the need to actually give what they pledged, and he also talked about the pledges they made yesterday at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Summit Conference in New York, and he emphasized the need to actually implement those pledges as well. So I think that the biggest message is that while the world does sort of listen to what countries like Pakistan are saying, and they do come to conferences and meetings, and they do make pledges, but they do not often implement those pledges. And that is why the Prime Minister talked about the need to come through the pledges that they made.
Anwar Sahab, I wanted to ask about India's response. Usually, whenever Prime Minister of Pakistan or some official actually delivers a speech, India reserves the right to respond. Do you think that there is going to be such an exercise now, or India is going to be too consumed by what is going on vis-a-vis Canada at this moment?
No, I think they will speak. They will respond. It depends on what level they choose. If they want a minister to respond, they will speak now. If they want an official, one of the members of the UN mission to speak, then they probably will do it tomorrow. But both India and Pakistan always respond to whatever they say against each other. So Indians are obviously going to talk about it. They are going to respond to, particularly what the Prime Minister said about Kashmir, because Indians get very irritated with the raise the Kashmir issue. They claim that there's no more an issue, that they have already settled it, which obviously, as the Prime Minister informed the global community that it is what India did is further expanded this illegal occupation of Kashmir, which is no solution, and the international community needs to understand this. And he also urged the UN Security Council to ensure that the resolution that was passed, about 60, 70 years ago, those resolutions are implemented as well. So Indians do respond, and when if the Indians respond, they will respond to their response as well, and this India-Pakistan bickering will go on.
If we look at obviously Prime Minister's speech, he has highlighted the challenges which are faced on the western border. Of course, I'm talking about Afghanistan. The terrorism, the ongoing terrorism which originates from within Afghanistan, that concerns the Kabul as well. How well it is taken, and do you think that the world, of course, sees Pakistan seeking sort of help in terms of fighting this terror?
I think there is a better understanding of Pakistan's position on this issue. There is not much love for the Taliban in the international community. They actually were not very happy when the Taliban came to power, and now that the Taliban have turned against Pakistan as well, so the world has noticed that, and they are. I think that the Americans also have spoken on this, and so did the United Nations, and they would help Pakistan fight TTP and other militants. The world is very concerned about TTP. The world is very concerned about ISIS. They also watch Al-Qaeda's activities in Afghanistan. So that is an issue on which Pakistan is being noticed, I would say.
Anwar Sahab, that you are surrounded by protesters. We can hear the
I know
Bengali
there
voices.
are so many people. They are very excited, and
maintain your focus.
let me share a popular slogan. They were saying, killer Hasina, killer Hasina. So I went to one of them and I said, look, this is a romantic slogan. He said, how? I said, you're calling her the killer beauty.
Wow. Anwar Saab, another important issue that was raised by the Prime Minister was regarding investment in the country. And this is, of course, the need of the hour in Pakistan. And our body, the SIFC, has been recently established to achieve that particular purpose. A number of priority sectors have also been identified by the Prime Minister. Do you think that the way that the world perceives Pakistan at the moment, given its current economic challenges, its relationship with the IMF and the political dynamics in the country, do you think that they also understood that there is opportunity for investment in the country at the moment?
Opportunity for investment, that's a tough one, because first we need to have security and we need to have enough stability. I mean, yesterday, remember when the Prime Minister met the IMF chief, she also talked about the need of stability and security and all those things. And so I think there will be no, even if the IMF or the World Bank were going to give statements, as does Washington. Washington also keeps urging Americans to invest in Pakistan. But I think nobody will come forward as long as they feel threatened, and as long as there is no political instability in the country. I think political stability and security is very important for attracting investment.
Right, absolutely. Anwar Saab, thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us at length about what is going on, and we'll contact you once again and get more details from you as time goes by. Faisal, the situation given, of course, what Anwar Saab was also pointing out is important in terms of course, the dynamic that we have given the current economic challenges. But let me also take Dr. Jamil's opinion on that, because this was a point also raised earlier. And of course, Jamil Saab, the situation is extremely important for Pakistan, given its very tough challenges for quite some time now that we have been facing at the economic front. And I understand that this perspective is important, but what Anwar Saab pointed out in terms of the number of prerequisites that are in place, including, of course, security challenges and many others, how well then do you think will we be able to make the world understand and attract them towards bringing in investment in the country?
No, well, security is a prime factor, basically. And because of the security situation, various countries have their own security advisory. And the big investors of European countries or the American countries, or for that matter, even Australian and others, they have their own assessment mechanism. Unfortunately, in our country, those assessment mechanism, which is in place universally, we do not sync our security assessment and our briefing according to that. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I have been serving in United Nations, and I understand the whole framework, how the security assessment is made. What happens is that in order to let the world know that Pakistan, whatever they see in CNN, BBC, and other places, and of course the act of terrorism, which we also admit why it is happening and how it is happening and where it is happening. But in our country, we don't really make them understand, and through a mechanism, through an internationally accepted mechanism, which is known as Security and Risk Assessment Framework. So basically through that medium, through that mechanism, we can always try and give them a level of comfort, and how that level of comfort is attained by the investors and by those countries, besides their security advisory, is basically once their security component, they come before the investment, we need to engage with them and make them understand that these are certain pockets, may it be Balochistan, may it be KP, and they are isolated actions, and our forces are prudent enough, our forces are efficient enough to take them on. See what happened just about day before yesterday. About 8 to 10 terrorists were killed, and a very important, very high-profile terrorists were killed by our security. Now, these things are the one which should be encashed. And basically, now those people who are willing to invest, they will like to invest in those places where they have all other parameters in favorable, more importantly, chiefly the security environment. So that's how it is done. But your question to the answer to your question, yes, through these mechanisms, like the Prime Minister, he also indicated about the about the investment opportunities in Pakistan and the way this new government are through this engine of through this mechanism of the special investment facilitation cell, they've been able to create an ease of investment or ease of doing business, and then security environments, they can always address that. But for that, our missions have to be very prudent. For that, our foreign office, our other departments have to be very prudent, and they have to understand as to what is the mechanism in the world. Various countries have various parameters of security assessment. It can be done, and it's very easy to be done. It doesn't require any extra budgetary allocation, and our Prime Minister has paved the ground in New York. It just needs to be followed up, and that needs to be followed up within the country and through our mission. So yes, the investment environment, the way at the top level it is being advocated, it has to be followed up by all the sectors of the government, by all the departments of the government, and particularly those who deal with the security assessment, not necessarily the forces, but security assessments are also dealt by various other entities. Yes.
Dr. Jamil, if we obviously thoroughly go through the speech of the Prime Minister, there were two very important things that can correlate, according to me. Well, number one, of course, the challenges. While he was talking about the challenges, he highlighted that food, fuel, and of course the climate. These are the challenges which are faced by Pakistan right now. At the same time, if we fast forward, he then welcomed the two of the countries sitting together and resolving their issues between them. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran. Can we simply correlate them to each other? Because if we look at the sanctions which were obviously imposed on Iran in past by the US, a lot of them, they had to do with, of course, their Cold War with Saudi Arabia in the region going on, and rest of the Gulf countries, they were bothered about it, and that is how there were sanctions on them of obviously selling their fuel. Can we say that in coming future, it is sort of laying the foundations for Pakistan obviously having a trade, especially in terms of fuel, with Iran?
Oh, definitely. This is one of those moves, the international diplomatic and political move from which Pakistan has always been a propellant. Pakistan has always been quite worried about the relations between India and Saudi Arabia. And at times we've been affected by the two very strong viewpoints of two different countries, India and Saudi Arabia. Now that they have their relations, now that they have established their diplomatic relations and their high-powered delegations have started with each others, they have ironed out their differences to its greater extent. While I was posted there in UAE and at some time back in Saudi Arabia, I have seen the very stringent instance of those leadership there, those rulers there. But though that melt has, that ice has been melted, there is definitely geopolitical effect of it, also geopolitical consideration, and behind that geopolitical consideration is of the world two big powers, China and United States. It's a little complex and complicated to really put it in a very simple terms, but I'll just give some indicators, and that would probably give your viewer a little better understanding as to what were the factors which paved the way. By the way, America has already released the seized fund of Iran, which is about $6 billion. So that is another very good milestone which Iran has attained. So what I was describing, this geopolitical background and the global geopolitical background and the competition between the two powers, in fact, it's a win-win game. China has brokered this relationship, whereas the United States has its very intense interest in the Gulf countries, and particularly in Saudi Arabia. So Iran was getting isolated. It was probably not under the radar of the Western countries and the United States as to what is going on. And my indication is towards the nuclear accord. And nuclear accord, ever since the U.S. had walked out from the U.S. accord, the nuclear accord by Trump, Iran had a free hand to do the enrichment. And reportedly, they did that because they did not have any international shackles around them to totally freeze that or stop that. Now, what is the global interest and what is the geopolitical interest of these countries, particularly the United States, is that they should have at least some awareness what Iran is doing. And that's why they are going to revive the nuclear accord so that IAEA, the inspectors of the Atomic Energy Commission, they are able to visit them, and Iran then should accede to, or Iran should then revert back to the same position under which the position which was suggested by the accord. And that would indicate that probably it will give a level of satisfaction to the United States and its allies, including Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia was, and the United States was under the understanding that if Iran is not engaged, they have already reached 95% of the enrichment, and probably they will be able to now have the nuclear strength, and they will become a nuclear power in that. So it's a little complex, but I've tried.
Okay.
Right, absolutely. And Dr. Jamil, I request you to stay with us. We'll be back with the discussion after a short break.